Welcome to Evolved Radio, where we explore the evolution of business and technology. Today I'm joined by John Scott from ScopeStack. We talk about some of the best practices you should use when you're scoping projects, things like fixed fee versus T&M, the difference between a proposal and a SOW, and how you can make your project scoping easier. This is a great episode with useful insights to help you up your project delivery game. You can increase profit and client satisfaction while reducing the burden on your tech team. If you enjoy the show, be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcast from. Also, be sure to check out the webpage evolvedmgmt.com/podcast for show notes, links to my guests, and to check out previous episodes. Now let's get started. Joining me today on the podcast is John Scott, CEO and founder of ScopeStack. Welcome, John.
Hey, Todd. Thanks for having me.
All right, so we're going to be digging into projects and project delivery and how to scope and develop projects for project delivery. So this would be really useful for the IT folks. And a good place to start, I think, would be something that gets debated a lot in the industry is whether or not you should do fixed fee projects or time materials. I personally am a big fan of fixed fee projects as much as possible. And given sort of the enterprise history that you have, as well as some of the SMB delivery, I'm curious, we can bat this around a little bit. What's your feeling on fixed fee versus time materials projects? Is there a place for time materials, or should everything be fixed fee like I prefer?
Yeah, I think, you're going to be right 100% of the time, right, Todd? So it's your podcast, you can be correct. No, but in all honesty, I think, if you can have a really buttoned up statement of work, then fixed fee is the way to go, right? I think the clients prefer the fixed fee simply because it reduces their risk. I think there's a lot of perceived value in a fixed fee project as opposed to a T&M, time and materials project. There's a lot to be misconstrued in T&M. And I think, I prefer fixed fee because there's a lot of value to that. And there are a lot of things that you could represent to a client just by showing fixed fee, right? Like you've done it before. You're not making it up. You know what they want. You know how to deliver it. I think with time and materials, you leave yourself a little bit exposed to the never-ending project. I think from a client's perspective too, they are typically a little weary of that because they don't know what the budget's going to be. They don't know what the price of the project's going to be at the end of the day. So much like construction on your home, it's a little bit scary unless you have a fixed fee. And I think it just puts everyone in a good spot. So
that's I agree. I think the primary one is exactly what you said. Just the peace of mind around what this is going to cost me and being able to budget for that is a really nice part for the client. And you can just tell them, like, I'm going to deliver on these deliverables and provide the value, and this is how much it's going to cost. It's not going to be more than that unless you change the scope. Right. That's a really important piece. The other piece I think that the providers need to understand is if you're doing fixed fee, that's where you're able to build in margin. So if you can do it faster and automate things and leverage tools to do things quicker, but still have a competitive bid that is built on sort of the labor effort, then that's really helpful. So you can kind of make a bit more margin if that's possible, or you can use those same efficiencies to reduce your bid cost and potentially deliver on a lower price.
Yeah, I think it's very easy for the end client to look at a time and materials, look at a resource rate, right? And say, I could just go get that same level of resource from someone else or go source that resource, within the market myself. So I think it just leaves you open to bits of risk that you just, if you've done this before and you feel confident in your service delivery methodology and the team, then that should absolutely be your primary goal, is to lead with fixed.
All right. Excellent. Another piece that people often miss, I think, when they're maybe a bit lower on the maturity scale for project delivery, is not including project management. And I hear this, the low end or the emerging MSPs, kind of the less mature groups, will typically push back saying, well, I can't include project management because the client won't agree to it, or they don't see the value in it. So we just have to do that on the side of someone's desk. And this sort of comes back to the first question is, if you're doing it in fixed fee, they don't know, and you can include project management, which increases sort of the availability for delivery and the quality of the delivery again. So what's your sense on how much project management should be included and whether or not it should be included in everything?
Well, I think you just hit the nail on the head in that, like, project managers are there to help you successfully deliver a project, right? So it's not some undue burden just because you're trying to make extra money. Like they have a very specific role, and that is a very special person in a project. I mean, they keep everything on the rails typically. It's not us engineers doing it for sure. But no, so what we're typically seeing in the industry, and again, we're working, with a lot of VARs across the globe now. That standard rule of thumb is 20% project management on top of your standard level of effort, or the rest of the engineering hours that are in the project. So we've seen some customers go higher, we've seen some go lower, but we typically start at that 20% mark. And what we've seen is that's pretty well received across the board, and a pretty good standard to roll with.
Yeah, it's sort of similar to what I do as well. The calculator that I built for this is similar to the product that you guys have developed at ScopeStack, and it automatically added it was either 12 to 15% of project management. It kind of depended on what we were looking at, and then we added 10% contingency, so that there was in that fixed fee there was some buffer for overruns or things that didn't go quite as well as we thought. So, and I think if you just combine those two and just call it project management, you can have that split into two pieces, but that ends up being that 20 to 25%, right?
Yeah. So what we did in ScopeStack was very similar background, right? And so we were doing the same thing in Excel, calculating a percentage for project management. But what we did in the software was we said, okay, you can set different levels of governance around a project. So project management, documentation time, contingency risk, right? Assessment time of the existing environment. And so we give you the ability to reduce the risk as much as possible on every single project by predefining a certain percentage. And so as you're increasing scope on a project, all these items are ebbing and flowing based on that engineering effort on it. So we've had business owners say, like, this pays for ScopeStack because we always forget it. We always, we're digging ourselves out of a hole from the get-go because we don't have it in a project.
Yeah, it's another good one is documentation time. A lot of people don't tend to think of that being built into the statement of work. That's a really good one to catch as well.
Well, I mean, that's the post-sales version of scoping for pre-sales, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, they're responsible for building that as built, and the documentation say, hey, this is what we delivered, especially in a fixed fee project. This is what we deliver, and it takes time. It takes time to do that. So you need to account for it for sure. Right on.
Okay, let's move up the sort of the scoping stack here. Scope stack.
Well done.
Another piece is I find there's a lot of confusion between sort of the three types of things that you'll need when you're pitching a project to a customer or a client. And I think all of these are generally required. The sort of the complexity of them can be different given the circumstance, right. But I find people don't necessarily know the difference or understand how these things are used differently. And the three things would be a proposal, a BOM or a bill of materials, and the SOW, the statement of work. And sure. I'll just sort of give my experience in this, and what I've seen is so many people tend to use a statement of work as a sales document. So a client says, hey, we need to get this project done. And the salesperson runs over to the tech team and says, hey, can we get this project built for them? This is what they told me they need. Technician proceeds to spend, maybe 2 hours, sometimes 12 hours producing this awesome statement of work. The salesperson runs it back to the client, and the client's like, oh, okay, thanks. We'll take that into consideration. And they've not really qualified the level of sales effort required here. And I find this is maddening that tech time is spent so much on pre-sales efforts without really qualifying sort of what should be done. So I think it's really, let's talk a bit about like what's a proposal, which is the sales tool. How is a BOM used, and then how's that rolled into a SOW?
Yeah. So from our perspective, a proposal is very much a sales tool, and it's got a lot of pretty pictures. It's got a lot of marketing content in it. And I think overall it's a much fluffier document, right? And so it's not technical typically from what we're seeing. There might be some high level numbers in there, but it's not an executable document that the client would sign off on and then project execution would happen. Again, a proposal is a way to really start qualifying the business opportunity with that client in our view. The BOM, I think, is like the interim step between that in the statement of work. So the bill of materials. So in pre-sales, what we're typically seeing is the bill of materials and the SOW are the two biggest things that any pre-sales engineer is working on typically. We feel like as an industry, the BOM development aspect is pretty good right now. I mean, tools at Cisco, Netformix, right? There are a lot of CPQ, configuration price quote tools out there today that are pretty well and pretty robust. And so it helps you validate quantities of power cords and, optics and all sorts of things. So what we feel like the next step is beyond that, after building out the BOM and the solution, is the statement of work. And so the technical language that's required, and it explains to the customer how everything in that bill of materials, which will get converted to a quote, will be delivered in a project. So I think there's a progression, right, from proposal, BOM to SOW that you're correct. I think is in your example, the sales executive or the sales teammate came to the engineer, said, "Hey, this is what I heard the client say that they wanted." The engineer scopes it based on the sales executive's take on the project without even meeting the client potentially, and that's just a huge flaw in itself from a process standpoint.
Yeah, I totally agree, and that I think that's sort of my frustration with that is the wasted effort, the wasted time. When really, I think the tech and the account exec need to determine, what's their level of interest here. Do they just want to understand, is this $5,000? Is this $10,000? Is it $50,000? Right? They're looking for that ballpark budgetary number, not something to hold you to say, well, you told me this was going to be $15,000 and you quoted me 17. Well, okay, we were talking about a proposal, but we actually did the statement of work, and now here's the actual price. So I think it's a matter of positioning, but also qualification with the client when you're trying to determine like what are you looking for here? Do you just want a ballpark number, or are you keen to go forward and execute on this project based on a need?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what we're trying to do with ScopeSec, right? So our vision is a couple of different things. That engineer sitting in a sales meeting with a client, and they could be, as the conversation's happening, they could literally be pulling in specific tasks, specific parts of a project to get them to kind of the framework of the project that the client's talking about, right? And literally you can click a button and say, let's generate a services brief. And so it's, high level business outcome, high level solution summary around what the client's saying, as well as some pricing and some budgetary elements. And so we can couple that with a way to qualify the opportunity very quickly, as opposed to in your past example, the 2 or 3 hours of the engineer's time to build that out. Right. So how do we reduce that burden on the engineering team, allow them to be in front of the clients a lot more, and then, create a technical document that's accurate at the end of the day, but much faster. Yeah.
And one of the other pieces that I really like about using a tool like this is the consistency of the quoting. So, excuse me, if you ask technician A to quote a particular project, they just sort of use their own frame of reference of, well, I think this will take me 2 hours. This will take me 12 hours. This will take me an hour. I think we're good, right? And then you go to talk to technician B, who's maybe a bit more conservative, and says, well, I think this is 5 hours, this is 3 hours, and this is 20 hours, right? So depending on who you talk to, the project can look very, very differently. And I think having like a library of defined deliverables and what the agreed upon deliverable time for those to execute in a project is really powerful from a quoting standpoint. One, because it eliminates that inconsistency, but also number two, it allows the consistency or the technicians to all agree on how much time a particular piece of work takes.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had a client, I had a conversation with a client yesterday that said that exact thing, right? So they have an engineering group with different levels of maturity across every single engineer. So the more seasoned engineers are able to scope a project and have really a lot of, they don't have as many questions about how to scope out this project because they've done it before. There's also the junior guys that do have a lot of questions. And so if you can use it also as an enablement tool to kind of level set your engineering team. So the mature guys, or girls, they're scoping out a project, they're defining the standards that then the other engineers can start consuming. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, from a consistency standpoint, that's what we used to see at a couple of partners that I was at, was the delivery team, the back office chatter was, hey, what did they scope this time? Right. It's the same technology we're deploying, but they didn't know what was in scope this time, just because we made it up every single time. And to your point, every engineer made it up differently.
And back to sort of the first question, that's pretty difficult to do a fixed fee project if not everyone agrees on what that fee actually is for a fixed fee project, right?
Sure. Yeah. And then think about like the future of that. So if you can start defining some standard service offerings and levels, but at a much more granular level, then you can start tracking that from a delivery of a project standpoint, and then, update the level of effort that's being scoped, right? So you become more competitive in the market because you know what you're doing on delivery, you know how you're scoping it, and there's a really nice back and forth relationship between pre-sales and post-sales at that point that should win you more business, ideally.
Yeah, awesome. So we touched on the SOW. If you kind of review statements of work that come out of any organization, they tend to look extremely different depending on what the organization is, and not a one size fits all. I've seen a 1 or a 2 page SOW. I've literally seen a 60 page or an 80 page SOW.
Oh yeah, those are fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Some good bedtime reading material.
Yes.
What would you say are sort of the essential elements of a statement of work?
So from what we've seen, based on talking to partners and building these hundreds of these out, if not thousands now, some of the basic elements are the basics around client info, contact info. Then beyond that, it's an executive summary and a solution summary. So really, executive summary being very business outcome. So what are they trying to achieve? What is the expected outcome from this project? And then the solution summary is a much more technical, how do I get to that outcome via technology, right? So those two things. And I think that those two parts are hard to automate, to be honest with you, because that's some of the art of a pre-sales engineer, is providing that context and that narrative around a project. Next, beyond that, we're seeing the technical language. So we're installing X widgets, Y features of each of those. And we're typically seeing that technical section broken down in a couple of different ways. It could be broken down by phases. So if you have a standard phase delivery methodology, we're seeing that it's broken down by locations. So if you're doing a multi-site project or a bunch of E-rate work, what are you doing for every single school or every single location, right? And then beyond that, we're seeing the governing language and the pricing, right? So assumptions, out of scope responsibilities, and then pricing of the fixed fee project. And, coupled with that, typically some billing milestones. Like, if we did the phased delivery methodology, phase 1, we're going to bill you this much after we complete phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, right? So that's typically what we're seeing from a standard.
What about some of the other elements that tend to get included, like exclusions, assumptions, some of the more, risk language that would go into those statements of work? Do you think that those are always required, or maybe dependent on sort of the scale, risk of the project?
No, I think they're absolutely required. And that's what I meant around governing language, around assumptions and out of scope. I think if you're doing a fixed fee project, you need to be very clear about what you're not doing, right? I think with the time and materials, typically that delivery is mandated by the client themselves and not the business, or the partner. So there's some flexibility there, with inherent risk, of course. But absolutely, I think assumptions of this project, things that are specifically out of scope, those absolutely need to all be accounted for.
Yeah.
And you can define a bunch of that up front usually. So if you're delivering this service, these things are out of scope, right? That correlation is pretty straight.
Yeah, the statements of work that I built, typically there was sort of a default set of assumptions and out of scope items, like just that were going to be typical with any project, and then you would just kind of review those and pop a few back in based on whatever the particular project was. But I think a lot of those are fairly universal, from the defaults that can be included, can be templated if you need to, right?
Yeah, I mean, the best line is, if we didn't say it above, it's out of scope.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So you start that one. If you start that in your, assumptions and out of scope section, then, at least you have a fighting chance, right?
Yeah. I guess one of the other ones we didn't mention as far as fixed fee, and I don't want to beat this idea to death, but I think it's really important because I still find it is not a universal methodology, and I think it's a missed opportunity. But the other bit around this is having that statement of work in a fixed fee project allows you to collect up front, right? Because the client will know how much that project is going to get and what the deliverables are for that. So you can bill the 100% of the project up front. And what I tell people if they push back is, at the very least, collect any hard costs. So if you have to purchase anything, get that money up front. And If they're still really nervous about billing 100% of the project up front, then you can do kind of maybe a 50-50 or a 75-25 up front and post. But then you run this risk of, the client delays on the close of the project and may complain that, that maybe this wasn't done and I just don't have the time to meet to approve the closure of the project. So if you're going to do that, make sure that you're in control of who says the project is closed versus not. They can sort of push back for a couple of weeks, maybe a window there. But I think that billing 100% up front is a huge value if you're scoping and billing projects correctly.
Yeah, and I think speed of getting back to a client is important as well. So if you're engaged in a client conversation, they're like, okay, I'm interested in this. I think if you're able to turn around these statements of work and pricing quickly, almost pretend like you've done this before, then there's a lot of business to be had just by like lost opportunity and timing, I think. Yeah. I've been at several large partners and they roll out, these commercial teams because they're trying to go after that business, but they're not built to go fast, right? And that commercial space, as you know, is very time sensitive. I mean, you've got to be able to react and put something in front of a client very quickly. Yeah,
no, that's a great point. So we've kind of touched on the solution that you guys have built at ScopeStack. Do you want to maybe elaborate a bit more on how the solution can help around the scoping of projects, the pre-sales, as well as the implementation and delivery?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, my background is very pre-sales oriented for some national global partners as well as some regional partners here in the States. And what I found to be a gap, and I think there are a lot of peers in this industry, you being one of them, right, that would agree, is the scoping and pricing function for a partner or for an ISV is a big gap, right? So as I mentioned, the configure price quote part is good from a BOM development, but the services and SAL part, especially the coupling of level of effort to language, is the big gap today. So there are absolutely really good tools out there around proposal automation, which you can pull in snippets of text and you can kind of build it, but it has nothing to do with level of effort and pricing and resourcing of that project. So what we did is we built, a modern web application that is built for pre-sales of a partner ISV MSP around services. So our whole thesis is if we can reduce the amount of time it takes to scope, also giving you the accuracy of a project, then you can win more business, right? You can reduce the burden on the business of having engineers spending, highly paid engineers spending a lot of time writing Word documents, which they don't want to be doing.
Yeah, they really don't.
Just if anyone questioned that, right, they really don't want to be doing that.
Yeah.
So what we did with ScopeStack was we built a very VAR specific, MSP specific platform around services. And so we give you the ability to scope and price out a project in one platform, coupling together level of effort and language, but also building on things like governance, project management, all those things that need to be considered in every single project, and just making it extremely easy. And so that's where we currently are, leveraging integrations, API integrations with CRMs like ConnectWise and Salesforce, to name a few, to make the sales to pre-sales transition easy. And then we're currently working on some projects to make the transition from that pre-sale scoping to project management and the PSA tools easy as well. So again, just bridging that gap between sales and post-sales is right where ScopeStack fit.
Yeah, that's awesome. I see it as upping your maturity game while also making it easier. That's certainly a win-win, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the cool features is if you're building projects on the fly, again, I was talking to a client yesterday about this. So like just start, you don't have to predefine everything to use ScopeStack. You can literally start scoping a project just like you would in your Excel worksheets today, coupling that with language. And then we give you the ability later to adopt those elements into standards. So it's, organically crowdsourcing kind of your mind share around technical language, level of effort and scoping that you can then go reuse on other projects, right? And so then, the project delivery team knows what to expect on these projects, and there's some consistency there as well.
Awesome. All right. So if people are interested or would like to reach out to you to know more, where can they follow you or contact you? And I'll include resource notes in the show notes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the best way, if you're interested in the platform, we have a free 30-day trial that's available to anyone via our website, and it is scopestack.io. And there's a big button in the top right that says sign up now. The other way to reach out, I'm very engineering, so I'm like, not social. So I am on LinkedIn though. So Scopestack John, again, John Scott out on LinkedIn. And so I'd be glad to have any conversation with anyone around this. And again, I feel more or less like we're still in the channel space than we are, a big software organization, right? So like, I think we're trying to solve a very relevant problem in this industry that we're getting a lot of really good momentum around, a lot of really good feedback from the industry on. And I think if we just continue doing that, we'll make something that's pretty great.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you being on and sharing some war stories about project scoping and project delivery with me.
Absolutely. Thanks, Todd. I appreciate the opportunity.